movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello, and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me today from the Ozarks is Mike Bogue. How are you doing today, Mike?
Doing well, doing great.
Awesome. Well, we're back. We've talked about 2001 Space Odyssey. We've talked about War Games. And so now we're hitting in the middle, right between the two movies. Now we're going for 1977 with the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I'm thankful you gave me this list of movies that you'd be interested in, and this one jumped out at me. For one reason, I hadn't seen this one before, and I always enjoy the opportunity to see a movie. And it wasn't the movie I thought it was. Like, I feel like I remember seeing it on cable, and I'd watch like little pieces of it, and it was super boring. And as I was watching this one, I'm like, the memories of those scenes don't match up at all. And this movie is super intense. It's basically like Jaws meets E.T. without
it's a good way to put it.
So because you were saying you saw this when it came out you said January of 78. So, and the really cool thing, this is the movie that you've seen 4 times in the theater. Yes. So what is it about this movie that you're like, this is in you're definitely your top 10, likely your top probably 3 movies of all time? Why is it that you love this movie?
It pushes a lot of my buttons, but I think I can actually say there are 2 main reasons. It appeals to my sense of love of mystery, the not knowing certain things in the film. For example, you don't really even know for sure that the aliens are benign. They're above us and they can do all these things. They turn all the power off in the town. They take the little boy, they do all these things. And even with the music, it's almost like it's ominous. There's that mystery. You don't know what they're about. They're just beyond us. The other thing that I really love is the sense of wonder that it gets across, especially during the final half hour. I think it does that as well as any film I've seen, and better than most. And again, I'm calling on my theatrical experience, but I didn't know what was going to happen in the film. Similar to when we talked about 2001, I didn't know how that was going. I didn't know what was going to happen in Close Encounters, and that was wonderful. Probably impossible in this stage of social
Really
media not to know, but I didn't know, and was blown away by that ending. Those are the 2 key things. For example, the sense of wonder. There's of course the mothership rising behind Devil's Tower, and then it slowly descends while everyone's looking in awe before their tiny little human base of operations. There's the musical conversation between the mothership and the computer, the humans' computers, and I'd never seen anything like that. Written science fiction had actually postulated that music might be a method to communicate rather than language. But again, all new. And then everything basically to do with once the mothership and that that was a great. I said a sense of awe, perhaps something ominous. You didn't know. I mean, I had assumed they're not going to destroy everybody, but you don't know what's going to happen. So I love that sense of what is going to happen. What are they going to look like? Because I've read one of the key things that Spielberg wrestled with was what should the aliens look like? He didn't want it to be like you could look at them and, well, we know that's latex masks and this and that. And the method he chose, which is basically keep them distant. There's the one alien that comes up to Lacombe, the French scientist, and it was animatronic, and for the time, just wonderful animatronics. But I found not having them talk imbued them with a sense of otherworldliness. just really really powerful. Another reason I love the movie, at the time, I had read a book called The UFO Experience by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and it was a major influence on Spielberg for this movie. No one before. Now, and I know a lot of people, and I'm not going to say, just say, well, no one's really seen a UFO. Of course, all it means is something unidentified. So I
Right.
think, yeah, people have seen stuff that we're not sure what it was. Who knows? But that's the point. We don't.
Yeah.
But in any event, Hynek had written his book, and he'd actually designated Close Encounter of the First Kind was visual sighting. Second kind was some kind of alleged physical effect, like in the film when Richard Dreyfuss gets a sunburn from the UFO over his truck. And the third kind was actually seeing an ambulatory being, which might be either organic or mechanical. Um, so I love that it took that. Spielberg took it seriously in that sense. And I don't think any prior Hollywood directors could have done that. I don't think they would have done that. They would just consider, oh well, this is just kind of ridiculous. There was a real disdain in the 50s and 60s among Hollywood filmmakers about science fiction. It's kid stuff. Forget it.
Right.
It was really George Lucas and Spielberg that made it acceptable for Hollywood to do it, and then the big budget science fiction movie became the staple.
Right.
At that time, when Close Encounters of Star Wars came out, it was the exception. But they helped. That's something in retrospect I love about the film. It did absolutely establish science fiction as a credible genre. You had all kinds of new filmmakers doing it. Um, Anybody young now would have no idea that at one point it was just considered kind of just dopey.
Right.
Um, you know,
Or even the superhero
yeah.
movies, because like you said,
Yes.
within
Yes.
almost back to back to back, you had Star Wars, Close Encounters, and Superman all
Yes.
come out, and
Yes.
there's a reason those movies shifted cinema.
Yes. And they did. And now one interesting thing to all three of them is John Williams did the music scores for all of them. And his music, I think, is really key. Actually, in all three films, I think they'd be good films without. But I mean, I think his music can really punctuate well. Um, the ending to Close Encounters, for example, when Roy Neary, Richard Dreyfuss's character, is getting selected, uh, and a lot of people probably wouldn't notice this, especially now, but as Richard Dreyfuss is walking up the ramp, you hear a quick strain of "When You Wish Upon a Star," and again, I don't think I caught it the first time I saw the film at all. Um, but it is there, and it's kind of Spielberg's paying tribute to Disney, who was um, really a super imaginative guy. Um, and in the filmic sense, Spielberg was kind of like a new Disney.
Mm,
He never pushed his films for kids too far. Um, he kept stuff reined in to a big extent. Um, but those are the reasons uh, the two sequences I love the most. One of them, it's kind of a long sequence, but it begins when the power starts going out in the town. And I love the details, like you see McDonald's
they're on
and
the
the lights
phone,
go
and
out.
has the power failure
Yes.
hit you yet? And then and then it goes out,
And
and the kids go, "Yeah."
yes.
The kids all cheer.
And it's a long sequence. Eventually, of course, Richard Dreyfuss sees the UFO. It does whatever it is it does to him, and of course you don't know why or what it's doing. And this goes all the way up to you see the first UFOs in the film, and nobody had ever filmed UFOs that looked like that. They looked like sculpted light,
Mm.
and the special effects supervisor on the film, Douglas Trumbull, that's what Spielberg had told him. He said he wanted them to look like sculpted light. Just a quick digression. Trumbull also designed the special effects for 2001. So he
Mm.
was, but yeah, Close Encounters on a visual level was stunning. Um, but that sequence that begins with the power going out and then goes all the way to the cops following the UFOs and Richard Dreyfuss following them, and then the power, gradually. It's just a great sequence, I think, and it speaks to the other worldliness, the unknownness of what are they doing and why.
Right.
You just don't have any clue. Whereas I like a lot of old science fiction films, but a lot of them, if when it was the aliens, you'd see it pretty quickly and blah blah blah. I like that it was kept mysterious, instead of just spilling it
Yeah.
all out.
And again, very similar to Jaws, where you don't actually see Jaws until near the very end of the
Mm,
movie. You don't really see, especially, and then when Barry gets taken, like you never see
mm,
anything, but it is a
mm,
terrifying scene. Like you are on the
mm,
edge of your seat with the colors and the clouds, and as you mentioned,
mm,
you're not sure if the aliens are friendly or not.
mm, mm,
Um,
mhm. Eh,
it comes to mind in a lot of these movies. I I look at the aliens as like a symbol for the supernatural, and it reminds me
mm,
of when Joshua sees the angel of the Lord, and they're about to go, sort
mm,
of attack Jericho, and he says, "Are you for us or against us?" And the angel's like, "Neither. I'm the commander for the
mm,
Lord's army. I know what I like." It's like I know what side I'm on. What side you're on is going to depend on if you're on my
mm,
side or not. But that idea,
mm,
like you had mentioned at that last scene where they're kind of going back and forth with the music, it would not have been surprising to see the aliens wipe out the army base. Like
mm,
that is like I almost was
mhm,
expecting it. And I loved even what one of the guys said is like, what are we even saying to each other? Because
yeah,
as the different
yeah,
tones were going back and forth, you're like, I feel like we're having a conversation, but I don't know what these words mean.
right, right. And in that sense, also is doing something written science fiction did that cinematic science fiction usually did, and that was that uh, communication with an alien species might not be verbal,
Mm,
uh, not may not be language as we know language. Um, in this, of course, in the film, it's explicitly musical, but there are those ideas in some written science fiction that an alien might really be alien, and the common view that it's going to look like us, and especially it's going to talk English, whatever. Uh, that doesn't necessarily hold at all. Um, but you said, and what's important is the in the film also it is the religious symbolism. All of the stuff at the end when the mothership comes down and they choose Richard Dreyfuss, the aliens choose Richard Dreyfuss, and it's interesting. You see all these other people in red suits that have
right.
been prepped,
Oh, they're
but they
vaccinations.
only choose, yeah, they only choose Richard Dreyfuss, and it's like he's going to heaven. I mean,
Mm,
and I like that because Paul said things unfathomable or inexpressible. Uh, I like the theatrical cut because you did not know what he saw when he went in.
yeah.
It maintained that sense of awe and mystery. And I thought that was a brilliant touch, not to uh, show, well, what is it? What does he see? Like there really can be things that we would not be able to express,
Yeah.
even once we experience them. Uh, but and the angels, the the first alien that you see, the thin one,
Mhm.
when it comes out and then spreads its arms, it to me is like a very angelic kind of uh, welcoming. Um, we're not hostile. As you said, though, the movie keeps a fairly ominous edge. Like, well, as I said earlier, when I first saw it, I didn't know what was going to happen, and it does stay fairly ominous in a lot of the time. Like you said, especially when the little boy is kidnapped. Um,
Well,
it's
to
pretty
me, and
harrowing.
again, kind of seeing it later, it reminded me of the movie Signs, where they're in the
Mm,
farmhouse
Mm-hmm.
And because how the light comes down the chimney or the
Mm-hmm.
blast of air comes up and there you see the screws coming out of the vent. It's
Mm-hmm.
very tense. It's a great scene.
Mm-hmm.
And as these Spielberg movies go, is it's all visual stuff. Like there's not a lot of
Yeah.
we may have one or two clips we play or none, depending on how our conversation goes. So
Mm-hmm.
just because the stuff is so well shown
Mm-hmm.
in Richard Dreyfuss and Terry Garr and Melinda Dillon are such tremendous actors that like
Mm-hmm.
you see it, you see the tension, you see the
Mm-hmm.
uh conflict, the relational conflict, especially between Ronnie and what's his name? Roy. You see the relational
Oh yeah,
conflict
Roy Neary.
between Ronnie and Roy. Because really, as you mentioned, that scene, that lengthy scene early on when Roy experiences the UFOs for the first time, his life has changed. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's a transformational moment,
Mm-hmm.
but his family doesn't get it,
Right.
right? Especially his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think when I mean that's to me the easy application is when we when Christ enters our life and we're transformed that way. A lot of times the people around us they don't understand it, they don't get it. Why are we different?
Mm-hmm.
How are we seeing this? And
Mm-hmm.
and so I do want to actually play this clip of after he's half sunburned, red on one side, pale on the other. His arm is even part of it is sunburned, and his wife comes up not to encourage it, but to sort of how can we keep the neighbors from talking about this, which I just think,
Mm-hmm.
again, this is the core conflict of the entire, well, maybe not the entire film, but it's the interpersonal conflict of between
Mm-hmm.
it within the family that
Mm-hmm.
that I think is important.
Mm-hmm.
Alright,
Mm-hmm.
I found this
Oh yeah.
So
baseball
after
in
this,
one
you
color.
take it
face
with
look yellow. What does this
what
remind
you
you
have
of,
to
Ronnie?
say, okay, Mike?
Alright,
Okay.
now we'll just. Dad, can I ask you a question?
What?
Are they for real? That's what for. No, they are not for real. I want you to go outside and have a hot dog, okay?
Ronnie, don't tell him that.
Roy, look, don't talk about this until you know what you're talking about, okay?
Ronnie, that's crazy. If I can't talk about it, then how am I going to know what's going on?
What? Mom, I believe in him. I believe in him too. Oh, no, you don't. Dad says you do. No, he does not. Do you, Roy?
Ronnie, all I want to do is know what's going on.
But nothing's going on. It's just one of those things.
Which things? Which things?
I don't want to hear about this
Ronnie,
anymore.
this is very important. I'm not just going to let it lay here. I'm going to call somebody about this. There's nothing... Ronnie, I saw something last night that I can't explain.
I saw something last night I can't explain.
I'm going out there again tonight, you know.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
So that's just sort of the beginning of the eventual erosion and of their relationship. But I loved how they both saw something they can't explain.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. It's yeah. Her focus seems to be, I want things to stay status quo. I don't want anything to change. It's one of those things. And of course, he
Right.
says, one of what things? But she just wants him to. I mean, she could get her way. You won't ever talk about it again. You, especially with the kids, you're infecting them with
Yeah.
your weirdness. And I think that could be analogous to maybe when you become a Christian, or perhaps feel you're called for a certain mission of some kind, not necessarily the mission field overseas, but of some kind, to be a teacher, be a minister, whatever. Uh, and the other person, like, no, I don't. I know I want it to be stay just like it was. I don't want things and it's sort of, you get the sense that Terry Guard, she kind of knows he's not going to give it up, much as she wants him to. And what is her motivation for? Well, I think it's probably multiple, but a lot of it is I want you to stay like you are. Uh, when in the film, when he starts shoveling dirt in the house and all this stuff, and all the neighbors are watching, it's like he's really becoming different than they are.
Yeah.
And that's what she just can't find acceptable, and so leaves. But I think that could also apply to somebody as a Christian, and sometimes maybe around other Christians, not necessarily just around non-Christians.
Right.
That's kind of sad, but I mean, I think sometimes that can be true. But but it's like you're saying, it's kind of like he's had a religious conversion in a sense. The
Yeah.
UFO communicated to him somehow. He can't fully explain. And I think, the same thing can happen to a Christian. And they can't truly explain what has happened to them. Um, so I like that there's that dynamic there.
And
And the Richard Dreyfuss, the Roy Neary character, he's completely pulled away from the status quo. And by the end, he's like I said, he's essentially going to heaven.
right.
um you, you do feel, or I felt bad about Terry Garr and the kids, though. I know at the end of the movie you're not even supposed to think about stuff like that, and I didn't when I first saw it, but in reflection, it's like, would you do that? Would you potentially leave your kids forever? In an interview, Spielberg, I believe it was 1990, even said, "When I made the film, I didn't have kids, but now that I'm talking to you, I have had kids, and you wouldn't just leave them behind that way." I think he saw
Right.
that as the film's biggest flaw.
And
Uh,
and we've actually sort of talked about that idea on the podcast, that if you are pursuing some sort of calling or mission from God, if it involves you leaving your primary calling and mission, which is your wife and your family, it's odds are
mm,
you're not really
mm,
participating in God's work.
mm,
Um, and so, because those scenes from the mashed potato scene to
mhm,
them, the family leaving, is painful to watch. Because
mm,
as tense as it was for Barry to leave, like, you see it, and you see the kid, in the background as he's sculpting mashed potatoes, and all of a sudden Roy realizes what he's doing is weird.
mm,
And he's like, I have this thing, it's going on, I don't know what it means, but it feels important. And then he starts, as you mentioned, throwing the pots in the house, the plants in the house, throwing
mm,
stealing the chicken wire, and doing all this stuff. It is, the word you used in your notes was manic, and I was like, that is a perfect word, because this
mm,
appears as if somebody in a manic phase.
mm.
and
Yeah.
and that, again, the tension, because for both of them, they both see something they can't understand.
Mm,
Roy can't understand even when they go back that first night out under the stars, and Ronnie is sort of hitting on him. She's like, we used to come out here and make out, and she's kissing on him, and his eyes are still looking for the UFOs.
mm,
She is
mm.
pursuing him, and he's pursuing the UFOs, trying to answer that question that really can't be answered.
Yeah, it's interesting that just in that one scene, it's communicated. They're already splitting up, like you said. He's now. Remember when I saw it? And, like I said 4 times, that scene got a laugh. Actually, when it
Right.
shows that Richard Dreyfuss is looking at the sky, but I think it was a great way, a shorthand way of saying, well, now there's an irreparable rift.
Right.
Uh, and it's just going to play itself out. Um, but and that's something else I like about the film. Probably taken for granted with science fiction movies now, but they seem like real people. They seem like credible, you know, normal people. Uh, their reactions to things, for example, Richard Dreyfuss's reaction, you know, he doesn't, he's constantly trying to figure out what's going on. And as you said, just completely continues to tear him apart. Um, and as you know, he and Melinda Dillon and the one guy that falls asleep are the only three the UFOs subliminally contacted that make it to Devil's Tower. And you do wonder about those other people.
Yeah.
Um, because they have that same longing and everything. Is that going to just go away now, or are they just going to? I mean, that's one thing in retrospect. I kind of wondered. Uh, you know, since they did get Richard Dreyfuss, was all that just going to go away for all of them if they reach Devil's Tower? You know, and I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't think the movie needed to give us an epilogue to tell us. That would have kind of ruined things too.
Right.
Okay, now you just saw this wonderful stuff. Now we're going to explain.
Right.
This is what happened to this person. That wouldn't have worked, I don't think. But it's the sense also of Richard Dreyfuss being the chosen one.
Right. Well, there's a
and
sense too with that of as the I can't remember the French guy's name, what his character's
Lacombe.
name was,
Mm-hmm.
but how
Lacombe, Lacombe.
Yeah. So he was even telling when they're in the decon, when he's talking to the major about why is he here? Why did you bring these here? It's like, well, these people came to a spot where we said you shouldn't be here. In the phrase, and he said, we're not even talking about the people who may have these visions, these nagging visions, but didn't see the news, or they saw it but didn't put the two together. It's almost like they deserve to be here more than we do. They were invited. And I sort of love that, how he's even in the helicopter as they're about to fly away, and he's like, we're here for a reason. Nothing's wrong with the air. Who's with me? And like 3 out of the 12 actually left the chopper.
Well, I love the one little quick scene where Melinda Dillon has the two birds. Presumably, if it is something toxic, they'll die. They're alive. But then when they've taken them out of the station wagon, and the one soldier brings up the birds are dead.
Right.
It's a quick scene, but you assume they must have, I guess, and you can actually. I almost became a lab tech once and worked at a turkey plant lab just as briefly. It is easy to kill a bird. I didn't know that without any weapon. You can break their neck very fast and they're gone. So, I thought, is that what was supposed to, I know as a viewer, it was supposed to confuse you. Well,
Right.
look, they're dead, but so I get filmically why they did that, but I thought that was awfully fast.
Well,
like I said, you can kill.
As they've gone through their barricades, and they're like, there's nothing wrong with the air. That's just what the military is saying to keep us away.
Yeah.
And they start passing the dead livestock, and you see the question. Like, I knew it, and now I'm less certain. And I read a book recently called The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. And he sort of talks about this in a very sort of, and as he sort of is equating tracking a lion through the African grasslands to tracking our own hearts, tracking our own souls to find life and to find, who we are. But this idea of we find a track and then we look for the next track. And sometimes it takes a very long time to find it, or you think you're on the path, and like, that's just the mindset that came is we are certain we're supposed to go to Devil's Tower. That is the image that's been plaguing us. And then they're on their way. They fight through the crowds. They fight through the barricades, and they're on their way. Nothing's wrong with the air. And then there's these dead animals, and she pulls out the birds. And then almost in unison, they put their emergency gas masks on, because it's like, because no matter how sure you are, you're like, I might be wrong. And again, just thinking of how that applies to us, like that's such a good scene and a good image, because like that, like we can find a track and we can say, oh, this is where I'm supposed to go. But now I see dead animals around me. Even my birds appear to have died. And it goes back to that whole idea of mystery, right? Because we're never sure. We think, yes, it's just, that's how they're clearing the area. But then we see the dead livestock. Oh, we think they did that, but now there's gas masks. Oh, now the birds are dead in the cage. Again, it keeps you guessing. Are they good? Are they bad? Do they really, like, we feel like from the beginning, they really exist because multiple people saw them, their effects, all this, but that, I guess the motive and the purpose is in question. And even that idea, I saw things I can't explain. It's like, and how do we make sense of that when, I guess, that happens in our own lives, especially when the people closest to us don't necessarily agree.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you bring up about, seeing the dead cattle. I think anytime, especially if we feel like we're doing something that we really think God wants us to do, and it's a long-term kind of thing, I think you can see things like dead cattle and think, well, maybe I'm just all wrong. Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe this is a good idea. And to my shame, I'll have to say, I'll just go ahead and say it. I'll tell God I really want to help X and such people I know are in dire straits, and it's not a big deal, but this is when I was still working. It involved me helping them move from one home to another, and loaning money and spending a lot of time with them. The bad part of me was like, I have a job that's like 60 to 70 hours a week. You don't have time for. And then the other part said, look, nothing said that if you're doing what you think God wants you to do, then it's all going to just be perfect. It's going to work out perfectly with your job or whatever. I mean, I had to remind myself, look, things are messy. That's okay. And looking back, I would have felt horrible if I hadn't done those things. Did they make it more stressful? Yeah. And I think that's another thing. I think a lot of the time, especially younger Christians, think it's supposed to be stress free. But the dead cattle like that provokes stress. I mean, I think there are things that can happen that it doesn't seem all that peaceful anymore, or, you're just not that certain about it anymore. But yeah, the dead cattle is an indication of, uh, maybe I'm wrong.
Right. And we have to fight
Yeah, I
through
think
the
that's
doubts and the fears. Is like, oh, wait.
yes.
And even
Yeah.
for Jillian, like, again, kind of going back to your comparison, is it's messy. We can talk ourselves out of it. Say, look at all these dead cows on the road. Now our birds are dead. And we can say we should turn back. This is too much work. I'm working 60 or 70 hours. This is requiring more of me than I really want to give. But two things happen. I think one is it's, as we see with Roy throughout the movie, this is something that he wishes he didn't have. Like, he's conflicted himself when he goes out, and that, again, the mashed potato scene, and then he goes out in the yard and he's like, would you just tell me?
Yeah.
But it's really easy to focus on the fact that Roy gets selected. He's picked. He's the chosen one. He goes off into the mothership to get all the answers to the questions. But without Roy's persistence, Barry and Jillian don't end up back together.
That's an
or at
excellent
least
point.
Jillian's not there when Barry gets off the spaceship. Like, she needed him to get through all the red tape. or to get through whatever it was you want to call it. But like she doesn't get through there without his presence.
Right. Yeah, and that's absolutely true. Yeah, so she's also like you said, there's an importance for her going all the way there as well. Um, it's interesting that when Barry comes off the out of the mothership, I mean he apparently was never scared anyway, and even early on when close to the very beginning of the movie when apparently an alien has come in the house and spilled all the stuff out of the
Right.
refrigerator, and
Again,
you hear
very,
Barry
very
laughing,
reminiscent of
chasing
what
them.
ET will look like.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Uh,
guess I don't know how
so
reminiscent goes backwards, but
well, yeah. So Barry, he he just doesn't seem to find it
Mhm.
uh frightening. That's where I'm looking for. He doesn't seem to find it frightening. Of course, if you're a really little kid, you don't know how everything's supposed to work, and so I could see how as a kid. As an adult, you're of course going to be more what's going on. If I went to the kitchen and I saw, something like one of those aliens is supposed to be, I'm not sure what I would do. But I wouldn't just feel benevolent and just, laughing like Barry.
Right.
No, I would wonder is this real, number one? That would actually, I guess it's
This
the one
was the
bad thing about being
70s,
an
so
adult. Yeah, part of me would actually think, is this a hallucination? Am I having a brain chemistry malfunction? Uh, and I really would think that before I would just think, oh, it looks like I would no, but that's yeah, like you said, Melinda Dillon needs to now the third guy that never makes it all the way. Um, really don't know what. Uh, and I think that was basically just to have a third person and
basically
to
the
show
red
what
shirt from
happens
Star
when
Trek.
yes, exactly. Oh, at least he didn't get killed, but basically, yes, he must be, yeah, all of them must have descended from him. Um, uh, I mean, it shows, of course, the easy for it knocks him out, and you see the birds falling out of the sky. Uh, and I thought that was a good shot or a good idea of seeing. But again, the film is very, very visual. I would recommend it to young people. I know that um, there can be a disconnect for some young people in older films. I get it. I especially get it if they're black and white and it's like pre 1970s, because I understand that your sensibilities, you didn't grow up. You did grow up with fast editing and this and that, which I
Mhm.
don't have to have. But then I grew up in a culture where you could have movies or TV that wasn't fast paced. In fact, often if a movie was, that would be one of the adjectives used to describe it, fast paced, blah, blah, because everything was. In fact, not that much was. And you just kind of accepted that pace. I think now that would be harder for a lot of young people to accept. But I
Yeah,
think they could watch Close Encounters.
if you compare the pacing of the original Star Wars with
Hmm.
the most current, the first one, I think the last Skywalker or
Mm,
the Rise of the Jedi, I can't remember which, episode
mm,
7.
mm,
Compare episode 4 to episode 7, and the pacing
mm,
in the most
mm.
current films are frenetic. Like it's action,
Yes.
action, 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 action.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
there's not much development of character and plot, and it's just like
Right.
chasing one
Right.
MacGuffin after another,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I think that was the downside of what Star Wars brought when it came to making science fiction an accepted genre in Hollywood. Eventually, science fiction just meant action.
Right.
You don't have that many big budget science fiction films from Star Wars on that aren't. The, and while I'm fine with that, I mean, I realize science fiction can be something other than that, but you just don't see that much. Again, Spielberg occasionally has tried to AI. I thought it was a good attempt, and it wasn't an action film. It wasn't a kids film either.
Right.
When I first read about it, and it's going to be this robot, this android that looks like a kid, and like your dead kid, and you just, of course, on one level that seemed like a creepy idea, but I heard of some parents taking their kids to see it. I don't know if you've ever seen AI,
It's been a
but
while.
there's the scene when the mom goes to take Haley Joel Osment out in the woods and leave him,
Mm,
um, and he's horrified that she's trying to get rid of him. It's a really harrowing sequence,
mhm.
and I know one colleague at the time was a mom, and she said, I'd never take my kid to see that. But she thought since it was Spielberg, it was probably going to be, and it's not. It's not for kids.
Right.
Minority Report, I think it was another attempt by him to do a fairly serious science fiction, but they're few and far between. Most of them are action. Again, I don't hate action film. I just think that's became too much of it. Um,
Well,
I even found.
I think that speaks back again to uh, sort of one of the core themes that you described from this movie is you look at those other science fiction movies and you're not experiencing the awe and the wonder. And whereas, like, you remember when Avatar first came out, like seeing that in the theater, very similar, was cutting edge and all this stuff. And it's hard, I think, to maintain that sense of wonder in the world that we have. One, because our attention span is, less than a goldfish these days. But the other is, if you watch Close Encounters today and then compare it to a movie like Avatar or like the new Dune, like visually those movies blow it away. So I guess if we're taking this search of, we have this search for wonder, for awe, for sort of even mystery. So I guess I don't know that I have an answer for this, but this idea, like, well, where do we find that in a world that's almost over the top with their attempts to, go bigger, go brighter, go more effects? And where do we find that how can we maintain that sense of wonder and awe and find some sort of something that appeases it, feeds it? Is my question making sense for you, Mike?
Yeah, no, it does. I don't have an answer. But I kind of see where you're going. For example, Star Wars and Close Encounters, I didn't find any. Star Wars was extremely entertaining, but there's nothing in it that struck any sense of awe or mystery to me. And I was 20 when I saw it. And I like that kind of thing. I'd read space operas and Edgar Rice Burroughs and all that, so this was not in other words, this wasn't out of my ballpark. I knew about this kind of stuff, but there was no sense of like I said, awe or mystery or any of that. Whereas Close Encounters of, he was just the. Now I remember at the time, and this is interesting, especially considering the context. I did know some friends that said, "Well, Close Encounters, not really a lot happens. There's not a lot of action. There's no spaceships firing rays at each other and things blowing up." Even then, I think there was kind of a demarcation. Well, it's just not that interesting if you don't have a lot of spaceships zooming around, and what so
Yeah.
even that early on, I think there's already that starting to happen. Because they're very different. Like you said, Star Wars is kind of uh, the grandfather of the modern, like you said, frenetic action films.
Yeah.
And Close Encounters, that kind of thing. It just seems rare that anyone attempts to do anything like that. And I don't know if it's true. It maybe that requires a slower pace. I don't know. to truly get across a sense of, in terms of special effects, like you said, pretty much everybody's seen just about every kind of effect there can be. So I think the context is going to become important, and that's where Close Encounters, for example, um, or I'm going to use a way off the wall, but it ties into what we're talking about. Believe it or not, Godzilla minus one, the most recent Godzilla film, which got fantastic
I've
reviews.
heard amazing
I
things.
saw it
I didn't
twice.
haven't had a chance to see it yet.
On Rotten Tomatoes, it's 98% fresh, based on 170 reviews. Film Critics Societies, it's won lots of Best International Film. Um, it's been nominated for Best Visual Effects for Oscars. But the reason I was bringing it up, it puts all of those giant monster tropes in a context that makes it different, even
Mm.
though you've seen action scenes before. It occurs right 2 years after World War II ends. Um, so Hiroshima and Nagasaki are still very fresh in the people's memories, and also the previous militaristic government that the movie basically says didn't treat us well. But my point is that the action scenes took on a different context because you had those human characters in it. And I think it made those action scenes more important. Whereas if it had been like a more typical movie, okay, well, there's some good visual effects, and that's all you would do. But I think it. So I think, uh, but I'm saying that, and it's not super fast paced. I mean, it has got really good reviews, and I know three folks who saw it who they don't like giant monster movies at all, but liked it. And again, it's character driven. Maybe that's
Mm.
another key to a film actually having a sense of wonder. Like Close Encounters is very character uh, heavy. You find out a lot about Roy Neary, his wife Ronnie, Melinda Dillon, her character. Um, it's now 2001's exception, but normally I think you have to have some engagement with the characters before there can probably be any kind of sense of wonder. And a lot of action films, that's like, as you said, that's not really what they're trying to even do. Um, so uh, you have. I was just thinking. I mentioned Godzilla minus one. I'm trying to think of any other science fiction films in the last few years that had a really character driven. Can't really think of anything offhand, but I think it is important. Um, I, at the end of Close Encounters, a lot of people in the audience were actually crying. Um, One thing I would do if
Mm.
I watched a movie more than once, I would sort of watch the audience to see how they were going to react to things. It's just something I started doing, and it was really interesting. But yeah, I mean, most everybody found the ending really moving. And again, if it had not been character driven, that just wouldn't there wouldn't be any sense of connection.
Right.
It just
Eh,
wouldn't. It'd be like, for the time, dazzling special effects. So what? You know.
right.
Um, but that's where I think Close Encounters works. It does have uh, we the cliche phrase "care about the characters." You do care about the characters.
Yeah.
What happens? Star Wars is you do care about the characters, but it's in a different way. There's not really a deep emotional involvement. There's not supposed to be, and I'm not putting down Star Wars. It's supposed to be a space opera,
Yeah.
and they're not supposed to be character heavy. It did get the stuff in the last few years has gotten a little darker, Star Wars stuff, but and actually tries to be character driven. Don't remember the title, but the one that did have Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher, um, they did try to do something. I thought with reviving those two characters and that kind of thing. But anyway, going way back to Close Encounters, uh, I think one thing I did, and you may have seen this in Wikipedia, but I know on several of American Film Institute's 100 best list. I think on one of the recent 100 best lists, just of movies in general, it seems like it was number, I'm probably going to remember right, 62 or something. But all things considered, it's pretty high.
Right.
And I think on best science fiction films, I think it was like number 11, something like that. Um, I do consider it. For example, if somebody wants to become science fiction literate movie wise, then I would say they need to see this film.
This is probably a starting point.
Yes, and I would recommend this before I'd recommend 2001, because I know that it's intentionally cold to a big extent. We talked about it previously, but it
Well, if somebody's new
to
to the
me it
genre, it's sort of like if this
oh
is your
no,
first time, it's like you need to work your way up and develop a taste for
yes,
it so that you can
yeah, and
see the
yes,
qualities and the nuances. Like if that's your first movie, you're like, sci-fi sucks. It's so slow and boring. You're like, no.
yes,
Let's
yeah,
start with a layup and work your way up.
and that's a film that at the time the pacing was considered very slow.
Yeah.
A lot of critics loved it, some of them hated it, and the ones that didn't like it would mention the glacial pacing. I mean, even say pacing, because it was all deliberate. It's not like, oh, well, we couldn't have. No, that was a completely conscious decision.
Right.
It's still debatable. Some science fiction folks still debate whether that experiment worked, and some don't think it did. I think it did. But
Yeah.
as I'd said when we talked about it before, but I was 12 years old then. I don't know if a young person could watch it and even kind of get the same things I got as a 12-year-old in 1960. Maybe not. Close
Yeah.
Encounters, though, I think would come closer because it does have the character-driven storyline. And for that reason, I think younger people could probably invest in it.
And you can relate really to both characters of Ronnie
Mm-hmm.
and her seeing her husband in her perspective losing his mind,
Mm-hmm.
is becoming completely ungrounded in, on the other side, his pursuit of what he knows to be true, despite all the naysayers and not lack of evidence, really. So, Mike, I want to wrap up with. I took notes as you were kind of processing all the. Well, how do we find the mystery? And from what I got, we can't really find it in movies today.
Like I said, I was trying to think of something
Yeah.
offhand. Maybe after when we're done, maybe later today, I'll think of something.
Well,
But I really can't think of anything.
right. And even so, if a movie is going to capture our imagination, well, then there's going to be the next one, then the next one. It's sort of like it's the law of diminishing returns in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But some of these
Yeah.
concepts, like if you're looking to increase the mystery, wonder, and awe in your own life, it requires a slower pace. Like if our lives are frenetic, if we're busy, if we're constantly one activity to another, to another, to another, we're not going to have mystery and awe and wonder in our lives. If we have
Yes,
to
I agree.
understand the context. It's as you mentioned, and I'll talk about the character idea in a second. But if we look at our lives as simply we're here for roughly 70 to 80 years to do whatever it is we're supposed to do, and then we die and that's it, there's not a lot of context to it. But if we're like, our story actually starts before the world is created, there's a larger story. We're a part of a larger story, a larger battle of darkness versus light, evil versus good. And what we do today will echo in eternity, to steal a line from Gladiator, but also Ecclesiastes. God has put eternity in a man's heart. And so if we understand the context of the story we're living in, which we have to slow down first in order to do that. Otherwise, it's get up, get the kids to school, go to work, come home, fix dinner, medicate, relief, beer, movies, Netflix and chill, whatever it is you want to do in the evening, and rinse and repeat the next day. There's not going to be a lot of mystery and awe in your life. And the last thing that you mentioned it's character driven. So the question becomes, again, you've got to slow down. You've got to understand the bigger picture. And then you've got to understand your character and your role in the story. Who are you? Who do you want to be? And what's most important? As you mentioned, Spielberg's biggest flaw of the movie was the fact that Roy left. He left his kids. He left his wife. And the story sort of purposely did it. They left him first. So that gave him permission to leave and pursue whatever. But even Spielberg's like, oh, I would do that different. I don't know what that would look like, but we would do it different.
Yeah, I don't either.
Right. It changes the movie. But when you sort of do those things in your own life, then it opens up your attention and it opens up your consciousness. It sort of makes you more sensitive to that supernatural aspect of life so that you can experience mystery. You can experience the wonder and the awe of which, so that, and it may not happen in the moment, but you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. This event or this interaction, or, as you were mentioning, as you're sort of mentoring this younger man who doesn't understand how young he is and how much life he still has. But for him to be able to understand that and was like, wait, I don't need to feel all this pressure to get stuff done today. I can breathe. I can take my time. I can see God work in me. I can see God work through me. And you see the supernatural happen. And that, I think it kind of tunes you in. It wires you to see the wonder and awe in your life. But if you just keep that fast pace, if you live a frenetic life, you're going to miss it.
Yeah, I agree.
So see, you said all that and you didn't even know.
Didn't even know I did. Yeah.
Didn't even know you did. Like, oh my gosh. I was writing these things that you were saying. I was like, yeah, that's how we have to do it. And as you're describing like what it is that captures that mindset. So I just thought it was like you were focusing on movies. And I was like, oh no, he's talking about our lives. He just sort of doesn't. Because when I asked the question, I was like, I don't know how. But then as you were answering it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's how we can do it. Which I thought was super cool. So you work. Mike, thanks once again for suggesting this movie and opening it up to. I really have no idea what terrible, boring movie I thought was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because this movie is really good. And if you haven't seen it or haven't seen it in a while, you should check it out. And now we've sort of spoiled the ending of a 47-year-old movie for you, but it's a 47-year-old movie. Yeah. I think spoilers go out of they expire after 5.
Yeah.
Do you have any books or any projects you're working on these days?
I do. I completed a Christian science fiction novel called A Perfect Flock. It's actually been published, so I'm in the early phases of marketing it. I have a book that came out in October, a nonfiction book about the nuclear war movies of the 1980s. It's called, it's not a happy title, Watching the World Die, Nuclear Threat Films of the 1980s. The nuclear war movies and post-apocalyptic things have always fascinated me since I was young. And I remember reading lots of books. My favorite book in that regard is called Alas, Babylon. It was actually published in 1959, but it is actually still super relevant to today. The nuclear war happens, but by that time it was still a pretty fresh subject. It wasn't like, well, we've seen that a lot of, but those are the two things. I am working on a third novel. I'm planning it. It will be a post-apocalyptic novel. But it will have a twist. As I said, I'm fairly familiar with the genre.
Yeah.
And I actually, an idea came to me about what you could do with a post-apocalyptic novel that I don't know of anyone who has, which just stuns me. I keep thinking somebody must have, and I'm just
You're
not
going to
finding.
discover it.
But
Yeah.
anyway, it's kind of exciting because I actually think nobody has, and it will put a new way of looking at it, I think.
Oh, very cool.
Um, so
And so
that's what
if
I'm
they want
working
to
on.
check out your books, what's the best way somebody can find them?
Amazon, probably the easiest way. Although you can find them on Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. You can pretty much find them on any of the regular
Anywhere you get your books.
anywhere you get your books. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. And what was the title of your new novel?
A Perfect Flock.
Perfect Flock. That's right. You
hmm
said that. Yep.
hmm
All right, cool.
And
We'll have to
I
check that
think
out.
I can give the premise in
Yeah.
one sentence. Um, Tug Jameson vows to keep his younger brother Clay from joining the Body, a religious cult that uses nanotechnology to turn its members into Christian automatons. And that's basically the whole thing summed up. That's actually an exercise you're supposed to do. I've read as
Right.
a writer. Can you actually sum it up in one sentence?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's well done.
And
Then.
so I've kind of trained to be able to do, because I had made pitches to a couple of publishers online, and you have to be able to. At first, I thought, how is that even possible? But looking into it and looking at examples, I'm like, yeah, it's. I mean, you're leaving out huge aspects of the book, but I thought, but you have to, and you do that really if somebody asks you, you read a certain book, well, what's it about?
Yeah.
You don't really expect them to go in for paragraphs. You
Right.
expect a pretty,
You're right. You
what's
got
the genre,
five to
you
10
expect some
seconds. You
just
don't have 2 or 3
basics.
minutes. It's an
Right,
elevator pitch.
right. Yeah, and that's actually what it's called. The elevator pitch, technically you can go on for 2 sentences. I also have an elevator pitch, but it's 2 sentences. But yes, and I took Jerry Jenkins' your novel blueprint course, and yeah, he says the more you can pare it down, the better.
Yep.
He says especially a publisher and agent, because they hear stuff all the time. They don't want to know details. They want you
Right.
to cut to the chase,
What's
because
the
that's
core
going to tell
idea?
them whether or not. Yeah, that's going to tell them whether they even want to go there.
Yeah.
Like what I was
Do I
just saying
even want
about
to
my
know the
book.
details?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
interesting because
Uh,
the tagline I had um I can't even remember, it's been years now, but it's God's not looking for religious robots, he wants faithful followers.
hmm,
So
oh,
you
that's
talked
good.
about Christian automatons, and I was like, wow,
hmm
that
hmm
that resonates. I'll have to check it out.
hmm hmm.
I'm always looking for new
Well,
sci-fi fantasy to read, so
well, uh, like
can't
I
get
said,
much newer
it's
and
pretty.
fresher than that one.
Yeah, and it's actually not. It's $12.99, which for a book anymore is not horrible.
Yeah.
Um, and I still prefer print books. I know a lot of people read ebooks. I have a little bit, just to see if I could get used to it, but I guess it's just I'm so used to having the other thing about a physical book, like if I do bedtime reading, and I usually always have, even when I had a job, and um, it just doesn't work with the smartphone to
Yeah.
me. Now, for a lot of people, apparently that works great, and that's yeah. But no, I really want to have the physical book
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
put the marker in it when you
If it's
you know.
like I read a couple this weekend, and it was like race through just cotton candy reading. It's like
hmm
I can do on
hmm
the Kindle or whatever. But it's like if this is a movie, if this is a book I want to really digest and enjoy, then yeah, it's got to be paper.
hmm 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 Oh, to me, there's nothing better than getting into a novel that's really well written. Uh, and because there are levels,
Yeah.
and we all know that. The the 5-star level, and it's sometimes, very rarely in the past few years do I ever read a fiction book where I thought, well, this is a waste of time. That just hasn't. What has happened on occasion, I hate to, I'll shut up here in a minute, is if there's too heavy a hand, and in that sense, I mean, politically,
Yeah.
and I'm fine. You you can have whatever politically you want in a novel. I just don't want it to be where everything. I can give you an example. My hero has this political mindset. He's right about everything. He's vital. He's tough. He can. And here's the villain. Let's say like they're a political liberal. And I actually read a book where this is the political liberal is weak. He's a
Oh,
coward. He's contemptible. To me, that's cheap. No,
yeah.
when I was working at college, of course, most faculty are liberal, and they're just people. That's one thing. Sometimes when I've heard Christians talk about non-Christians as though they're the enemy, I'm thinking, well, they're just people, and they're really
Yeah.
not the enemy. They're not the enemy.
Right.
It
Right.
bothers me when I hear that because I'm thinking, no, they're not the enemy.
They're really
And a lot of
trying
us
their
would
best.
yeah, a lot of us would be where they were if we weren't Christians. So
Yeah.
that's kind of. I read a book recently where they allowed the writer. It was pretty clear, politically conservative, but he wasn't heavy-handed.
Mhm.
The liberal in it really honestly believes, even though he's shown to be mistaken, but he's a good person. He's not a terrible person, and I appreciated that.
Oh, nice.
Because you don't make the person that you don't agree with a terrible person. That's just to me cheap. I don't
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yeah. It makes the story preachy and not an interesting story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed doing this.
Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing and exposing me to another movie. And yeah, and look forward to having another conversation with you.
Okay, sounds great.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Mike Bogue talking about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Side has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was,